Well, there you go. There is the call. Now, the statistics, and Conchi was talking about some of them being appalling, and one of them is very serious. It's really sad. The Pew Hispanic Center recently informed us that in the last election, there were a number of people qualified to vote, more than 21 million Latinos in the United States. And of those 21.3 million, only a little over 6 million voted, in fact, in the last election. That means that 15 million people, 15 million Latinos stay home and didn't really push in favor of all of us. That cannot happen. The Silver Foxes are known for being active, and politicians will really tell you that they fear senior citizens because they know that they will vote. But it's not happening in the Hispanic population. What is wrong with us? What can we do? That is the issue of our discussion. And so, Mark, why don't we start with you, and then we'll come to Andres to talk strategy. Sure. But first with you, expand on those numbers, because it's really appalling what is happening with our vote.
Well, there's a number of stories that I think are really interesting in the data to take a look at. And you'll have to forgive me because I'm a data guy and I talk about data all the time. I was actually crunching some numbers before I came over here. So I may look a little bit like I've been in the weeds for a while. But there's a bunch of interesting stories coming out of analysis of data that I think is really worth telling. First, when we talk about the number of Latinos eligible to vote, that number, the 21.3 million that Armando was just mentioning, that number has been growing, and it's going to continue to grow for a number of decades. When you take a look at how fast it's growing by anywhere from 2 to 2.5 million additional new Latinos who are eligible to vote between presidential election cycles. So if you think about that, that's a lot of numbers. Now, the biggest part of that growth is coming from young people. And this is really what distinguishes Hispanics from other groups, is that when we talk about the Latino vote, it's younger than most other votes. And that's just the very nature of the demographics of the Latino community. But let's talk about those Latino voters who are over 65. So in 2010, there were 6.6 million Hispanic voters. But of those 6.6 million, about 1.1 million were people over the age of 65. So when we talk about the Latino vote, those over 65 represent a large portion, 1 in 6, of all Hispanic voters. What about when we talk about voter turnout rates? That is, what share of all those who could vote actually voted? And keep in mind, I'm not talking about the share of registered voters who voted. That's important to know too. But it's also important to know of all those who could vote, what share actually voted. And when you take a look at it for Latinos overall, here's what we saw. In 2010, the voter turnout rate was 47.8% for those Latinos who are ages 65 and older, 47.8%. Now that's higher than it was for all Latinos, which was only at about 31%, 31% in the last presidential election. Nonetheless, compared to whites and compared to blacks in the same age group, for whites, 63% of whites 65 and older voted, and 56% of blacks ages 65 and older voted. So even though Latinos who are 65 and older are more likely to participate, their participation rates are lower than they are for similar aged people in the white population and in the black population of the United States. Even so, though, one other thing that's characteristic of the voting population of people ages 65 and older is that it's growing. There are now 2.3 million Latinos ages 65 and older who are at least 18 years of age and who are also U.S. citizens, so they're eligible to vote. And just like the general Hispanic population, that number is growing. When we talk about what sort of differences there were, say, in 2008, looking at 2008 to give you some sense, the voter participation rate among those Latinos ages 65 and older was actually 56%, and there were 1.2 million Hispanic voters ages 65 and older in 2008. All told, the story of Latinos in voting has got many different dimensions. And I like to tell the story like this. First, there are more Latinos than ever eligible to vote. Second, in recent elections, the number of Hispanics voting has actually reached records. In 2008, nearly 10 million Latinos voted. In 2010, 6.6 million was actually a record, more than any other midterm election year. So what we're seeing is more participation. But on the other hand, among Latinos, whether we're talking about those 65 and older, whether we're talking about those ages 18 to 29, whether we're talking about those who are native-borns or those who are foreign-borns but have been naturalized to become citizens, participation rates are lower than they are for other Americans. And the gap, while closing, is still quite large, anywhere on the order of 15 to 20 percentage points depending on the year. So there's a lot of potential. And in fact, the report that we released was entitled More Voters, record number of Hispanic voters, but also more non-voters. Because not only is the number of voters growing, but the number who could vote if they wanted to but don't is also growing. And we see that happening nationwide. So that's just a little bit of some of the data. I hope that I wasn't too much into the weeds. But I'd be happy to answer any questions that you all might have about any of the results that I've just talked about, all of which are available through the Pew Hispanic Center's website.
Those are wonderful numbers, and those are incredible numbers, especially when you see that also 500,000 Latinos are becoming eligible to vote every single year. And that means that it's almost 50,000 a month.
That's right.
That's more than 1,000 a year, a day. So it's really incredible the power that we are wasting, that we have in our hand and we're not using. Now, let's talk strategy. And that, Andres, is the key point. What can we do in order, first, to organize the Latino vote, the mature Latino vote, and then we'll turn and deal with the young people. But what is that we all in this age can do to participate and to be more active and really to push politicians, to give us nice speeches, but nice results?
Thank you, Armando, for having me. Muy buenas, muchas gracias.
It's a
Buenas
pleasure to
tardes.
have you.
Un placer estar aquí con ustedes. I just want to make sure that I comment just briefly on my colleague Mark's presentation here. And I want to venture to you that I don't think that Latinos have a voting problem. I think Latinos have a voter registration problem. And that if you take the numbers of those who are actually registered to vote and what the participation rate is of those that are registered, then that percentage jumps up to about 80% and higher. And so the issue that we've seen is that when we register Latinos to vote, they're actually voting. The problem is we're not registering enough Latinos. And that's where I was always told never to interrupt someone, one of my elders.
And that was a good one.
So we as Latinos, nuestros abuelos, nuestras abuelas, we live in a very family-oriented culture. As a Latino political operative, I can tell you that when I started in high school. And one of the processes that I found most significant was one from my own childhood, one from my own life. And that is that if abuela told you to do something, you did it. Because if you didn't, then mom would get mad at you or dad would get mad at you. And it just created a whole set of complications that as a teenage kid, you didn't want to deal with. So when I began working on campaigns, and as we talk about, the greatest potential of registering voters has been the same for the past decade. It is young Latinos who are turning 18 years old, who were born in this country, who have citizenship, who can register and speak on behalf of our community, but they're not taking this as seriously as they need to. That is where our elders, that is where our abuelas, our abuelos, our dads and moms can begin to take into effect and take a greater leadership role to ensure that our younger people are registering, that they understand the sacrifices that our families and our relatives from the past went through. My parents came here through the Bracero program, as well as my grandparents, just like many others. They experienced the discrimination that happened, just like many others, had to walk through back doors and drink out of certain water fountains, and they had to give up a lot of sacrifices that I have no idea what that's even about. I was very privileged to grow up when those discrimination patterns didn't exist. Our younger kids, even my daughter and younger brothers and sisters, they understand that even less. They have no concept of the value of what was fought for to ensure that our community had a right to vote. What they do know is that they're supposed to respect their elders. Because if a Latina mom does nothing else, they teach their children, you respect your elders. And so where we can begin to weigh in more is begin to talk about that. The second thing, we're talking about strategy, is really look at the states and the elections that matter. Let me make it very clear to you. Politicians and elected officials care about one thing, and that is about votes and how to get elected. And if you don't vote in their districts or you're not registered to vote in their district, then your voice is less meaningful to them than someone who is. And so when you need to begin to mobilize, whether you're in the state of Florida, whether you're in the state of Nevada, whether you're in the state of Texas or New Jersey or DC or Maryland, you need to identify the elections in which you can make a difference. And if you don't live in that district, then you need to talk to people who do. And you need a phone bank, and you need a canvas, and you need to do mail, and you need to organize, call your abuelas, call your madrinas, call your comadres, call your friends, call your relatives to say, hey, that election in Nevada is extremely important. And if Latinos don't show up to vote in the state of Nevada, then Latinos are going to be screwed nationally, because that is the one place we have a chance to make a story. Or whether that state is Florida. Those election districts change. Now, it just so happens that in 2012, Nevada, Colorado, New Mexico, Florida will be 4 states in which Latinos will have a huge chance to shape the national narrative. If you're a Latino who lives in Iowa, I'm sorry. No one's going to pay attention to you. If you're a Latino who lives in New York, I apologize. Most people aren't going to pay attention to you. If you're from the great state of California, a lot of people aren't going to pay attention to you. That is just the reality. That does not mean Latinos still can't send a message. That doesn't mean, just like in 2010, we bust hundreds and hundreds of Latinos from California into Nevada to have them knock on doors, to have them educate other Latinos, to let them know that those Latinos who live in those key districts are speaking and representing for Latinos around the country. And if they're not voting for the right candidate and sending the right message, then they are hurting everybody around the country. And so that's the one thing I do want to make sure I emphasize, that if you live in a district or you live in a place where you feel like there's not enough Latinos, that's okay, because there's no law that prevents you from engaging in any other district or helping or working in any other district. So I will stop there and open up for questions, Armando.
Thank you so much. And we have questions. We'll have questions from the audience. But is there any election that you may think of that was decided by elderly Latinos, or that where the Latino vote was crucial in the results? Any can come
Absolutely.
to your mind?
In 2010, we saw several. Harry Reid, the United States Senate Majority Leader, very clearly points to the fact that if it wasn't for the amount of support he got from Latinos in Nevada, he would not be the Majority Leader right now. The state of California credits Latinos in the 2010 election. Michael Bennet in the state of Colorado credits Latinos in the state of Colorado for making sure that he got elected. So we've seen a variety of these states in the most recent election in which Latinos very clearly voted in such large numbers that they provided the margin of victory for the candidates who got elected.
Yeah. There's also people who say that somebody that was called the Big Honcho this morning was also elected because of the Latino vote. And President Obama,
2008,
hope
yes.
that he remembers that.